Good morning and welcome. I'm Adam Block, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. This open meeting of the Needham Council of Economic Advisors is being conducted remotely consistent with current state regulations, and it's being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless required by law. This particular meeting will not have public comment. First, I'll confirm that all members of this subcommittee meeting of the district refocusing group are present. When I call your name, please respond that you are present. Adam Meisner.
Present.
Which I should say is Adam Meixner, properly pronounced. I learned that yesterday.
Yes, you did, but it's okay. I've been called worse.
Rick Putprush.
Present.
Bob Henschel. Bob, you're on mute. If you could, we're just doing attendance. If you could say present, that would be good. Bob is signaling thumbs down. We'll come back to him.
Does that mean he's not here?
Here but not here.
We can't hear you, Bob. We could before. Jeremy Halpern.
Present.
Mike Wilcox.
Here.
And Adam Block, the chair, is present. I hear a little echo, but hopefully that's. Oh wait, Bob, did you just say something?
Yeah, how about now?
That's good. That's good.
All right, I am present and accounted for.
Very good. For others participating in the aware that others may be able to see you. Anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website at needhamma.gov, unless otherwise noted. The ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. If you could state your name as you're making a comment, that would be helpful so we can make clear in the minutes who we attribute the comments to. And from time to time, I may ask any members for a motion of various kinds as appropriate as agenda items come up. So thank you all very much for being with us here this morning. It has been a little while since we've convened. This subcommittee group, the District Refocus Subcommittee, last met, I think, in March. Is that right, Amy? Wow.
Correct.
So we have minutes from our March 29 meeting. I should also note for the record that Amy Halson, our Economic Development Manager, is also with us. I apologize, Amy. And so first of all, I'm not sure if people have had a chance to review. If not, we'll chat about our last meeting in a moment, but in the meantime, if there's someone that's able to make a motion to pass the minutes of March 29.
A motion to pass
So
the
moved.
minutes.
We have a motion by Rick Putprush. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Adam Meixner. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Please signify your vote by saying aye or nay. Adam Meixner.
Aye.
Rick Putprush.
Aye.
Bob Angel.
Aye.
Jeremy Halpern.
Aye. Aye.
Wilcox.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you all very much. Bob, do you have two devices running at the same time by chance?
I barely have one running at the same time. I mean,
Okay.
you want me to shut my phone off? It's right here. I don't know if that's interfering at all.
Are you using your computer or your phone?
I didn't get that. Try tapping a button.
What's that?
Are you using your computer or your phone to log in?
Computer.
Okay.
Adam,
Adam, you appear to be repeating.
Yes, I think anyone is.
Anyone aside from Bob? So that may be Bob. Do you want to maybe restart your computer, Bob?
Sure.
Or just exit the Zoom and then come back in.
All right.
Am I still repeating? So I
Nope.
wonder if he's called in on one and has audio on the other device. Maybe he's got his phone running both and his computer. Anyways. So in our March 29th meeting, we had talked a little bit about our efforts previously, and what this group has previously been studying or looking at was the central business district and the Chestnut Street business district. We looked first at the use table and we looked at the dimensional table, and then this group went for a walk along down Chestnut Street and along the central business district. And ultimately what we're looking to do is determine whether there is other action that we should consider to help realize the goals of the district or change the goals of the district if it's not working. There were 2 overlays that were passed by town meeting to foster greater growth, and one project materialized. It might be appropriate to have a conversation with that developer. I think that's the project. It was on Dedham Avenue. I can't remember the number. Is it 50 Dedham Ave?
It is 50 Dedham Avenue, and I have reached out to this gentleman and have not been able to connect with him. I will try again, but I agree that there's great value in speaking to him and hearing firsthand his experience and what was challenging and what worked well.
And I think he's the only developer that developed a property as a result of those new overlay districts, which is not new today, but was new at the time. So, so I guess we have we can review some of our core observations. One of you had mentioned that having a structured parking. I think Bob, you had mentioned having parking somewhere in the center of town would make things a lot easier and would improve the condition for businesses. I suspect that that's true. I think we looked at, would it be possible to have a lot in terms of siting it, a larger parking structure, either behind Cook or in the lot. I think someone else suggested perhaps the lot where Walgreens is. And I know, Amy, you had mentioned that the town is going to do a parking study.
Yes, so the funds were approved at Maytown meeting, and the study it's gone out to bid. So we're in the process. There's a team of us working for the town that are actually reviewing the proposals. So we should have a firm named by the end of October, and the hope is to launch the work starting in early November. So having representation from the CEA in giving input to the parking study is going to be very important. So we can certainly talk about that as time comes, who would be appropriate. Perhaps a couple of members from the CEA, but certainly as a whole, talking about it at our next CEA meeting to discuss parking in Needham Center and Needham Heights and how that's going to impact business development and current business.
So you've received all the proposals?
Correct.
And how long do you anticipate the study taking?
The town has asked that everything be wrapped up by mid-January.
So it would start in November, and then the work would be completed in January, and then a recommendation made for town meeting for May. Is that the plan?
It really depends on what the recommendations out of the study are going to be. They're going to look
Right.
at, current parking as far as use. Recommendations are going to be made as far as not only the parking management program, but the meters. I hear a lot from the businesses that only allowing coin payment for meters is antiquated and that it's a real obstacle for customers coming to Needham Center. So everything's going to be looked at as far as use, inventory, future needs, which we've talked about at previous meetings,
And
whether or not we need to continue to have parking requirements for new businesses because they continue to seek waivers from the planning board or the ZBA in that regard. So it's going to be a comprehensive look, not only at Needham Center, but Needham Heights.
And who else? So is there a committee that's?
It has not been formally put together as of yet. I have put together a recommendation as far as who should be on. We're going to have stakeholders, which would include, so we're going to sort of have an internal working group as far as staff to sort of manage the study. I'm leading the charge on that. But then as far as an external stakeholders group, we're going to ask representation from Needham Center businesses, a retail business, a restaurant, commercial property owners, some residents at large, from both Needham Center and Needham Heights, representative from, looking at my list here, Finance Committee, somebody from Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, somebody from the Needham biking community, somebody from the select board, somebody from the planning board.
All right, so that gives us an idea. Rick, go ahead.
Yep. Amy, I'm curious. Does anyone track or does anyone know what the actual income from the parking meters?
Yes.
What income is generated by the parking meters?
Absolutely. So the finance department keeps very close track of that. In fact, we have a parking clerk, which also he's the gentleman who keeps track of the income coming in specifically from the meter. So I don't have those figures at my fingertips right this moment, but that's going to be part of the study. That's all going to be considered.
Mhm.
And just to bring this back to the districts that we've been looking at, it's good to know that there is that parking study there, and we'll obviously come back to that and talk about it as a bigger CEA group shortly. But parking was one. I think height was another comment that people talked about, and also uses. So one of the things that was also brought up, I think Amy, you had brought up that there would be some changes made in theory, potentially to mixed use, because of, some of you may or may not be aware that the state is preparing new guidelines that municipalities can adopt, which would substantially reduce some of the burdens and would make facilitate by right larger scale multifamily development, multi-unit development, in particular along a tight radius of the transportation routes. And in Needham, obviously, we have 4 commuter stations. So so that's gonna, and that line runs right through the center of town, and that could, hopefully we'd be able to realize significant multifamily development, which would, Rick, you've been a strong advocate for greater residential density and for higher height. And this tool would be part of the tool in the toolkit to help incentivize that kind of development. But we do have some of these height restrictions, I think, around the cornice of Town Hall, and the effort there is to make sure that that other real estate development doesn't dwarf, I think, Town Hall. So I think, how relevant is that today is one question.
Adam, I just want to mention that I had a lengthy discussion with Lee Newman, the town planner, about the last conversation we had at our subcommittee meeting, which I know was many months ago, but there was a question as to why overlay district A had a different height for buildings as opposed to overlay district B. And if you'd like, I could pull the map up to show everybody again, but it was curious to us as to why the building height was higher, say, across the street on Great Plain Avenue from Town Hall, but yet Chapel Street and Highland Avenue, the height was lower.
Yes.
So I spoke to Lee extensively about this, and back in 2009, when the downtown study was conducted, there were working groups which were made up of representatives from the planning board, the select board. There were residents in town, there were businesses, there was apparently a large group of stakeholders that were very invested in the study. And it was a recommendation that came out of that group of stakeholders and the study to not have the building height along Chapel and Highland Avenue be higher than the cornice of Town Hall, because as you are approaching Needham Center from those two roads, the view of Town Hall, they felt as though it was going to have an impact on the historical integrity of Town Hall, and that it wasn't felt in the same way as coming down Great Plain Avenue, because you don't have the same perspective or view of Town Hall. Now, whether or not there's an appetite to revisit that 13 years later, I couldn't say, but it's certainly worth considering if this group feels strongly about it.
I think it's I'd probably want to get a little more clarity on where the town may sit with that. I think Mo Handel, who was a select board member and who had been a longstanding member of the CEA, was also part of the town, part of a town group, I think, to remodel Town Hall, and he has a lot of history and knowledge, so I'd like to reach out to him, which might be helpful. I think it's interesting, and it's probably true that there is a different perspective coming down Chapel than perhaps Great Plain, but I think it's also time to revisit that overlay, because how else are we going to increase density and achieve the goals of greater residential development and do our part for to ease the burden of the housing crisis without actually changing some of these dimensional requirements. So do you guys agree that it makes sense to reconsider the height issue now on that area? Yes, Bob?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my
Yeah.
recollection of that, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
In my recollection, that 2009 study is that it was heavy on emotion and light on analysis. I mean, it just seemed to be a real visceral reaction against height in any form. So I think a more logical look at it this time around would make sense. And this gets back to a point even about parking. Maybe the answer isn't more parking, but maybe it's just more logical regulations that reflect the reality on the ground. If 3 spaces per 1,000 just simply aren't available in town, and that's what is required of retailers, well, why don't we reflect the bylaws to reflect reality?
Yes.
And I kind of feel that way about height. Well, it's a different point on the height. I just think sometimes we make these bylaws way too complicated for really no discernible benefit. Having multiple overlay districts in downtown just seems a little kludgy. And I think, certainly the result is there, or the lack of result is there, right? I mean, it's not like it's really affected any change. So anyway.
Jeremy. and then I'll come to you, Rick. Jeremy had his hand up first.
Do we know, is there any actual negative reaction to the Needham Place development? I think it's like 48 Dedham or whatever it is.
50 Dedham
with-
Ave.
Did people, once that was built, did people have some kind of unhappiness, or no one cared once it was built?
I don't know. Does anyone else know, like officially, if there were complaints and so on as a result of the development once it was up after? I don't know. I don't know that we have that information, Jeremy. But I
just
tip.
feel like it seems like it was done in a tasteful way. It integrates well with town center. If somebody told me that it was 3.5 stories instead of 2.5 stories, I have trouble picturing anybody being so aghast at the whole thing. But anyway, short answer to your question is yes, I think we ought to significantly think about the height restriction, because if we're going to change the density and the young professional quotient, the only way to do that is probably mixed use stuff that's retail on the bottom and residential on the top. And that's going to require it to be at least 3 stories, or no developer is going to do it.
So Bob and Mike, you guys both represent significant landlords in town. One of the questions that came up before when we talked about this is if we did increase the height and we went from one district, which is now, I think one of the overlays is 3 stories or 3.5 stories, and another overlay district is 2.5 stories in terms of max height by special permit. Let's say the planning board and town ultimately passed further amendments to the zoning bylaw that increase the height and FAR. You're still left with property owners that have properties that are currently fully tenanted up. What does it take for a landlord, to give notice to tenants that have, some may be long-term tenants, that you're going to quit the lease because you're going to redevelop the property? That's not
Yeah, I mean,
You go ahead.
just with any zoning change, I don't think you're going to see immediate results anyway. I think it's going to be much more evolutionary. It's something that's going to take place over a length of time. But I think that's one of the challenges that you see in Needham. Is that it's a relatively well-off, healthy environment that isn't really spurring a lot of change in that respect. I don't know, Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need an intensity of development that makes the benefit worth the costs that you're going to incur to, whether it be have tenants, terminate their leases, pay them out, what have you. I mean, I don't know a lot of the details of his projects, but if you look at what, Rob Korf has done in West Newton, he obviously took over a number of parcels and did, essentially an amassing of sites in order to support a substantial development. And I don't know if something like that is possible in Needham Center, just, given maybe the parcelization of it. But bottom line, I think there has to be, financial incentive for someone to, take on something like that and incur, obviously the costs of new construction and whatnot.
So let's take a look at that for a second. I see Adam and I see Jeremy. Jeremy, you had and Rick. What is the current price per square foot, let's say, for retail in Needham Center? Are we looking at $40 a square foot, $55 a square foot? Where?
I don't have any properties there, but Wellesley is like 40s and 50s. Maybe it, kind of trend a little bit below that.
Yeah, upper
30s. And is that for new, like newly, like with tenant improvements? Is it renovated property or typical condition?
That's on renewals.
Yeah, but that will vary in terms of new deals from
Yes.
existing.
The reason I ask is because, thinking through on a practical level, if, ultimately, I think what we're saying is that if a landlord is currently somewhere around high 30s, maybe $40 a square foot, and for new construction, having displaced all of the tenants, gone through the permitting process, which can take a couple of years, displacing the tenants, they're gone a couple of years without income while they demolish and rebuild new space. Does that mean they have to go from, $40 a square foot to $60 a square foot in order for the economics to work, given the displacement? And who knows what happens to those tenants? Do they come back during? Because one of you also brought up the idea that some of the spaces, like a restaurant space, you can't really just move them somewhere else because of the intense investment that they typically make in that space. And some of the other retail spaces are kind of customized for that. And the tenants contribute towards tenant improvements. Sometimes a landlord does. Yes, Rick?
In my opinion, this, from a practical standpoint, staying with the practical side of things, because of the fragmented ownership, it's going to be difficult to get a project of the size necessary to justify the economic risk of being able to build, do what it is that you're talking about. And also the height restrictions on places like Chapel Street and Highland Ave near Town Hall. From a practical standpoint, Chapel Street in particular, I mean, no one's going to build a 5-story project on Chapel Street next to Town Hall. It just wouldn't make sense at all, given the amount of space that you have between Chapel Street and the rail, the commuter rail. So, I mean, I don't see that really as a problem. Maybe it's a bargaining chip for getting height elsewhere, saying we'll give up on the height on Chapel Street or maybe on Highland Ave. I think Great Plain Avenue is the opportunity. Great Plain Avenue and, a little bit further back on Chestnut Street on from Great Plain Avenue. That's where the opportunity lies, I believe, where you might be able to do a project that is large enough for someone to be able to justify taking the economic risk to do the kind of a deal that we're talking about. And to Jeremy's point before, we're talking about a 3-story building with first floor being residential. Even on Chapel Street or Highland Ave, that's not going to be higher than Town Hall. So it wouldn't be a problem anyway. But I think the focus really is Great Plain Avenue and going south.
Thank you.
I can just tell you, we've looked into some developments that don't make sense under the current zoning, and also simply aren't attractive under the current zoning. They're kind of short and squat and unappealing. So I think height is actually it's not all bad. It can actually be an architectural design tool that can actually lead to a lot more interesting developments. I think there's benefit to the town that perhaps isn't readily apparent, and it's just kind of easier to reject it out of hand. So I wouldn't give up on it just yet. Let's put it that way.
Rick, before I come to you, Jeremy and Adam also have their hands up and wanted to jump in. Jeremy, go ahead.
Sure. You made a slightly different point, or started to before, about the difference between the by right and by special permit. And I will say, as someone who's not a real estate person, the permitting process in Needham seems Byzantine at a level that's kind of ghastly. And so I think, one of the ways to encourage development is if people knew that they didn't have to run the gauntlet and the politics and all the toing and froing, like, I really do think it would make a meaningful difference to the way people thought about it. But that's an outside point of view. I have not been in the sausage making, but if we were to recommend that if people have a special permit right up to 3.5 and a by right by 2.5, like, why are we not just saying it's 3.5 and calling it a day? What's the upshot other than imposing political control and then creating uncertainty for potential developers?
That's a great question. I mean, there is an answer to that. There is a break point. I mean, even with if you're developing, I think over 10,000 square feet, and you're still under, let's say, a by right condition of less than, of 2.5 stories, and you're otherwise compliant with the dimensional requirements, you still have to go through a site plan special permit process. And the reason for that is because regardless of the by right condition and the conformity of the regulations, it's not so much, as you mentioned, a political activity as it's a way of blunting or mitigating in the impact. So in other words, it's a municipal interest, public good for the municipality on any development that's over 10,000 square feet of new construction, to study the impacts on a host of items. There's a whole list in the zoning bylaw of the impacts that either the planning board or the ZBA looks at to understand what the impacts are, because that can influence what would happen. And the town has before denied a special permit because I think of some of the impacts, but it's not that common. And your point overall is still well taken. It is, it is seen by many outside, the sausage that it can be a complicated process. That's ultimately what you're saying. Rick, before I come to you, Adam also had his hand up. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back for a few minutes ago about Mike bringing up Corf and everything. I mean, like the size of the developments that he's doing along Washington Street are just so massive that, he could justify keeping those rents, like the retail rents, at the same level that they are. And he's making up so much more money on the backside, or I should say for the upper floors and everything, which are, I don't know, 5 stories or 6 stories or something like that. And I mean, yeah, he had to spend a lot of money, I'm sure, to take back those, get tenants to terminate early. But again, he was going to make it up. He's making it up, I'm sure, tenfold on the backside of it. And I mean, the other thing is, like, people always complain about, the size of the developments, which is what we're talking about here, in height and everything. I think with Washington Street, that's much more of a commercial district when you're driving down it than, even though, Chestnut Street or Chapel Street feels, more like town hall-y, I guess, or, town atmosphere. I just think that people will be up in arms about if anyone tried to do anything close to, what Corf is doing there to make up the money. So even if they could push, even if the zoning changes, right, and it's like a little bit more, I don't think they're going to be able to make enough money, by just increasing the rents by $10 a foot to justify a redevelopment or anything like that. So
Interesting. So there are some very significant challenges that aren't just regulatory based, it's also market conditions. Rick?
I think I mentioned this at a previous meeting, and I don't know if there's budget for this, but it would be, I think, beneficial to whatever argument we have if we had an architect do renderings from various sightlines along Great Plain Avenue and Chapel or whatever of what a 3-story or 4-story building might look like.
I'll talk to Lee Newman in the planning department, or Amy, you might be able to. That's an interesting exercise to do some renderings. I don't know if someone on the design review board could mock something up and how easy or difficult that is, or if someone from the engineering department could do that, but
Can I just jump in with a thought? When I
Yeah.
was working in Dedham, we worked closely with the Urban Land Institute. And you can submit a proposal to them, and they basically have a team of experts come in. They be zoning specialists, architects, landscape architects that come in and they study a defined area. And there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes beforehand, but they basically come in and they come to your town for one day, and you've got stakeholders that meet with them, and they study an area and then come back with recommendations, which could also include renderings and that sort of thing. So the town does need to put some funds towards the cost of the process, but it is little in comparison to what you actually get in return. So we did it with Dedham Square many years ago, and it was a really amazing experience. So that's something, let me look into that, because that may be the very thing that it's time to revisit. It's been 13 years since the downtown has really been studied, and a lot's changed in that time. And if we could get some experts to come in and give us their thoughts on next steps, that may be beneficial for us.
Mike?
I did that same process in Milton. I serve on economic development in the Lower Mills area. You do have to prove to them that there is a project that has enough characteristics to it that would be, they don't want to just do a study. They want to do something that will basically, trigger, what is seen as the favorable development options that they're looking at. So I'm more than happy to help you with it, Amy. I know they only do it maybe once or twice a year too. So we just need to get more information about what is needed. They want to interview different stakeholders that day. As you say, it's a one-day event. They bring everybody in, and then there's a work product that you have thereafter that you can hopefully use to leverage, the desired outcome, as I said.
So is that a function, Mike, where they changed some zoning regulation and it spurred development, or was it a non-regulatory issue that was cured?
This was a density issue for housing development on the old Henry site on Central Street in Milton. So they look at everything, they make their recommendations. They look at, what the status quo is, and then they make their recommendations, which it does include zoning as well. They came up with what they thought was, a doable count on residential units on top of a retail development on the street level.
Because it seems to me that we're dealing with some regulatory or regulatory things like the dimensionals in terms of density and height as one factor, but we're also dealing with the practical matter of a landlord having 6 tenants or 2 tenants. It doesn't matter how many tenants they have, but if they're committed on these leases, what does it take for both the landlord and the tenant to break those leases? And getting an extra, if they have, Amy, do you recall offhand how many condos are in 50 Dedham Street? Is it 12 units?
I'll confirm that.
So let's say we have a scenario where we're able to go to 4 stories total. And first floor retail, 3 stories of residential, and we're able to get another 12 units in a building. The landlord will obviously make that up in the long term, but what does it take to actually quit a lease early? It's it sounds like that's also a big hurdle, and the fractionalized ownership. So if people own small lots and you can't really produce much as a result, what does it take in order to get multiple owners to give up their property and sell to a developer who can take advantage of the, let's say, new zoning?
Adam, I also wanted to mention one more thing. You had mentioned the DHCD multifamily
Yes.
housing from the MBTA. I did also want to mention that it is possible, nothing has been decided yet, but it's possible that Needham Center may not be included in that, because in order to designate an area for the MBTA multifamily housing, you have to allow housing by right, and that would include just housing. So not, you can't restrict it to a mixed use property.
Right,
And so whether there's an appetite to have just residential on a, a lot that's commercially zoned in Needham Center. So would we want to bring in, 4 floors of residential in Needham Center if there was no commercial activity on the bottom floor? That question hasn't been answered yet, but I'm just throwing that out there, that Needham Center may be off the table for that by right housing.
should the CEA participate in that discussion? Would it be helpful for town management to understand and have the Economic Development Committee explore the benefits and the costs of that type of outcome?
I certainly think it would be beneficial for the CEA to have an opinion on it. I know that there's been, the housing working group has been working behind the scenes, but this is even a separate effort that has been led by the town planner.
Sure.
But we had that conversation recently, and in which she mentioned that there's a question whether or not Needham Center should be included in that. So I'm just curious what anybody's thoughts are in this meeting, as far as whether a prime location for commercial activity in Needham Center should be allowed for just 100% residential property.
Rick?
I think, yes, absolutely. There's room for everybody. And by the way, I want to add, Adam, I happen to be the owner of a building in Dedham, which allowed me to participate in that Urban Land Institute activity that they did in Dedham. And I could tell you it was a very, very interesting process that went a long way to convincing people or getting to people with the torches and pitchforks to lay them down once they understood and saw what could be done and what the benefits of those things were. I thought it was a great opportunity to build consensus for whatever was going to come thereafter.
So it looked at a piece, so that study looked at a piece of property based on what the current condition is and what a future development could look like. And as a result of that, it quieted opposition that enabled.
Not just a piece of property, but it was an overall plan for a specific area.
Not just one piece of property.
Right.
Interesting.
This is what is, and we don't want this because of this or that or whatever, the pitchforks and torches. And once ULI put everything together regarding the pros, the cons, the benefits, the whole idea of one picture worth 1,000 words, being able to show renderings and plans. I think it went a long way into getting consensus among the people who were worried about such things.
I think that, having any of these tools, is definitely helpful. And it sounds like, Amy, it's something that we could look at, for this area. Another thought that I had, I'm just trying to picture in my head that, going back, Amy, to what you said of the potential of the all housing scenario, would that be a requirement? In other words, if someone wanted to take, and there are multiple owners, but from Harvey's Ace Hardware all the way on that block, what's at the end of that block?
Hearth,
CVS, Hearth and
farmhouse.
Farmhouse. So if you've multiple owners there and they all agreed, let's say, to sell, I would be hard pressed to think, given the demand that's clear and robust for that real estate on the commercial level, that it would just, that you would have apartments on the first floor. So if there was demand for commercial on retail on the first floor, but 3 stories or 3.5 stories of additional residential, would that be permissible or not permissible?
As I understand it, if you were going to designate an area to qualify for these new zoning, the new zoning from the state, is that you have to allow 100% housing by right, multifamily housing.
You have to allow it by right, but does
Correct.
that mean that you would deny a mixed use development? Like, it would not be?
No. It means a mixed use of development absolutely could be allowed, but if the builder wanted, or the developer wanted to do just 100% housing,
You
that-
can't
that-
deny that.
you can't
Okay.
deny it.
Got it. So there's a couple of things that we need to resolve here. First, is it worth our effort? Do we want to spend the time to continue studying Chestnut Street and the Center Business District, or do we want to suddenly move to a different district? And if we do stay with this district, what else, do we look into? I think one is having a conversation with a developer at 50 Dedham Street. That would be a next step. Another would be a further exploration into the Land Institute to see what type of a study might be available to us in these districts, right? And then also we'll look into talking to Amy. Can you look and talk to Lee about any resources available for a rendering of what development might be, what it might look like? That's ultimately, Rick, what you're thinking about it, correct? And how it may.
Say again?
Rick, were you thinking of having a rendering of a model type development in context in relation to town hall, or were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, if that's the issue, then what would it look
Brought
like
out.
relative to
Right.
town hall?
Right. So,
Adam,
yeah,
when you say, are we ready to move on to another zone? Does
Yeah.
that mean that we would be prepared to make a recommendation as to what we've already come up with?
good point. It depends if there is, do we have resolution yet on any recommendations? I'm not sure that we do.
Adam, I think if the purpose of the CEA is to have an opinion on the future of what Needham is to its residents, then I think where we are in the center of town is the biggest bang for the buck. Just as an aside, and I don't expect Needham to ever look like this, but I don't know if anyone else has been over to the Arsenal in Watertown recently. Just happened to go to the movies there over the weekend. I was completely flabbergasted by what that development has become with
Yeah.
its mixture of residential and commercial. And the
In a
activity,
good way.
yes, the activity on a cold, kind of rainy day of people out and about, walking in the stores, and you know, there is just a combination of retail and residential that I hadn't been over there in years. I just remember the old mall being there. It was an old tired mall, and what it's become is was incredible to see.
Yeah. I've seen that, I've been there as well and agree. It's, I'd love to see that vibrancy. And I think what you're looking for is not the same level of vibrancy, but still, a proportional amount of vibrancy in the center of town where people gather. It's more diverse retail, it's more interesting retail. You've got great restaurants which we already have, and you've got dense residential that immediately supports all of the commercial activity right in the spot.
Bingo.
So I get that. So just to circle back here, are we at a place where we could recommend to the select board something to change, or for the select board to consider, or do we still want to study this before we formalize any type of recommendation?
What would the recommendation be?
I think one recommendation is to explore a structured parking in the center of town, a multi-level parking structure, as part of an effort to overhaul the parking system in the center of town. That's one recommendation, with additional or different signage. I think another recommendation might be to have renderings done to understand visually what a development might look like in the context of town hall, and probably have 3 or 4 different renderings done. So you're looking at it maybe from Chapel, from Highland, and Great Plain. Another recommendation might be to get authorization from the select board to engage with the Urban Land Institute to see if they can, is it a grant, Amy, that they?
It's basically, it's a grant, but it's also in kind type of services. So you basically have a group of folks who volunteer their time to ULI, and then they are the ones that are assigned to your specific project.
So then, so the recommendation would be that, to explore an application. And then another recommendation would be to reconsider the heights in both Needham Center Overlay A and Needham Center Overlay B districts. So those would be the immediate recommendations. My only hesitation here is, one, do we have enough? And those are some decent recommendations. But I'm not entirely convinced that if we were to change the zoning, let's say by a floor, and allowed a proportional increase in density, would the change in regulation be enough to overcome the practical change required with the landlord? In other words, it may not just be a landlord thing. Jeremy, regulatory thing. I mean, sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
So you had said some other things over the course of the meeting. Maybe the recommendation is we need to survey property owners to discover the economics of redevelopment from 1 to 2, or from 1 to 3, or from 2 to 3. Are there
Yeah.
things in particular that make sense? You also mentioned surveying the tenants about disruption. If they had to relocate for 12 to 24 months, would they stay? Would they leave? What does that mean for them? And then similarly, can we be creative about, we had talked earlier about flex space. Or are there town supportable options to help keep those tenants in the event of disruption? We had also mentioned, did we want to look at digital parking options, or is that being taken on? Just, we don't need to tackle that because other folks are doing it?
That's going to be part of the parking study.
Yeah, okay, so maybe we don't need to be.
As is also, Adam, when you say a parking deck, I mean, they're going to be looking at parking in the center and the heights comprehensively. And my understanding is that the recommendations out of that would be whether we should increase parking and what does that look like? The parking management system, including, the hours, the rates, the meters, how people pay for meters. So it's from soup to nuts. So I think it's until we get the outcome from the study, I think it is premature.
Okay. I understand that. Jeremy, go ahead.
Sorry, one last thing, which is when we were thinking about flex space, one of the things I realized I didn't know is, what are the town-owned properties? Like what does the town actually own itself that could be utilized in anything from an actual tent space to a trailer space to, something that is kind of temporary. Like what Boston did at one point was they threw up District Hall on a 10-year lease in a deal with the property owner. Now that's not the kind of thing we need here, but you could imagine someone putting in the equivalent of temporary facilities onto a town-owned property. I just don't know what the town-owned properties are. Do we have stuff in the center of town? Do we not?
So not really. The town's not in a position to be able to do that. We have additional structures, I think, for instance, at the Hillside School, but that's going to be swing space for other municipal projects. The Emily Grover building, which is the school administration building, that's in the center of town or pretty close to it. And that's going to be undergoing a substantial renovation over the next several years. So
right.
I don't see.
I guess my point is, I don't know how many of you have been to Time Out in Boston. I'd originally gone to the one in Portugal and I was a huge fan. And then we helped develop the one in Fenway. And think of it as like a beer hall, but it's a bunch of different restaurants having smaller spaces. You could imagine that we could have one space that could house, 8 or 10 businesses for the purposes of 1 to 2 years that would allow them to stay in town. Maybe there's financial recompense from either the landlord or the town or both to support this. But I'll go back to what I said in the last meeting, which is I'm 100% certain that if we do nothing, nothing changes.
I think that's true. I get that. I like the creative thinking. And that's something that we can look at. We need to determine now, though, as we get close to wrapping up this meeting, what are our next steps? Do we want to continue looking at this, or are we in a place to make some of these recommendations? Rick.
I love the ULI idea, because I think that covers a lot of bases.
Okay, so let's not wrap this up yet. We'll look into that. We'll Amy, you've got a couple of things to talk to Lee about. And we'll also try and see if we can have a conversation with the landowner at 50 Dedham. And see what that process was like and where some of the procedural things might be able to change to make things a little easier. So we're going to continue to stick on this, on these districts for now. Just an update on a couple of things that the CEA has been involved with in the past. First of all, the planning board has closed the hearing on the former Muzzy site. So the CEA had participated in a significant way in helping to change the zoning for that area, which obviously led to a successful rezoning effort at town meeting. And now Bullfinch bought the property and has conducted the planning board has conducted a hearing to review the application, and the planning board is going to move into deliberations, I think, in November. So stay tuned on that. Deliberations will probably take about a month or so before a decision's ultimately reached. So that's one thing that's, the CEA has played a significant role in, and now we're actually seeing real change come about. And then another item that we had talked about, we had made a recommendation to, I think, the select board some time ago, effectively supporting the change of the Avery Square overlay district in the Heights, based on a development project that would restore occupancy into the former Avery Manor building at the corner of West and Highland Avenue. So the zoning effort was successful at town meeting. And there was that zoning change was based on a particular development that included 3 levels of care: independent living, assisted living, and memory care. And an application came forward that the planning board had ultimately approved, and then the underlying property owner dissolved that partnership and partnered with a new entity, and has come before the planning board for a new project that is driven by 2 levels of activity, not 3. So instead of having independent living, it's just assisted living and memory care. And that application is before the planning board as well. So that's just some recent activity that's happening. Amy, are there other big permits that you're aware of, or development that you're aware of that?
Just not development, but wanted to mention the breweries.
Yes. So thank you. So the town, as you may be aware, because I think we provided also a letter of support on that some time ago. The planning board has revised its former zoning bylaw amendment from earlier in May, as a result of a pretty extensive process to line up the regulation with the alcohol permitting process and licensing regulations. And we've further refined some of the districts. And that's going to go before town meeting in October. I'll be making a presentation to town meeting on that, and hopefully that will get approved. There are some people that are looking to oppose it, I think, because there's one landowner in a particular area who wants the use available in his area. But the planning board decided not to allow the brewery use in that particular area because of the homes that you literally have to drive through on this street to get to that part. That's an industrial district at the end of Crescent Street. So Crescent Street, which is off west near Highland Avenue, Crescent Street is both in a residential district and in an industrial district, and you have to drive through these homes in order to get there. So in any event, Amy, are there other things? Oh yes, Bob.
Where is it being proposed?
So The uses, so there's two uses. One is a brew pub, which is basically a restaurant as a primary business and a brewery as a secondary business, and a microbrewery. And those uses are, I can tell you, I had this up. Here we go. So a brew pub is being proposed for the business district, this center, the Chestnut Street Business District, the Center Business District, and the Avery Square Business District. But with respect to the Chestnut Street Business District, there is a limitation where it's west of Chestnut and south of Keith Place. So that kind of protects the residential area, kind of south and east of the hospital. A brew pub and a microbrewery are being proposed for certain parts, not all, but certain parts of the industrial districts. All of this is by special permit. And the microbrewery is also being allowed by special permit in Industrial 1. And then in the New England Business Center, both uses are being would be allowed with some restrictions on the geography. So it will be west of 2nd Avenue and south of 2nd Avenue. Both uses are being proposed in Highland Commercial 128 and Mixed Use 128. So those are the areas that we're allowing the uses predominantly.
Sorry, I just signed off a minute ago. My computer completely tweaked out and shut everything down and restarted.
It's forgiven.
Yeah, but I actually got to run to a 10
Yeah.
o'clock
Yeah.
appointment anyway, so sorry about that.
No, I think that's good. Does anyone else have anything else they want to? Yes, Bob.
Take care, everyone.
Just out of curiosity, what's the schedule for the town green? Seemed like there was a lot of activity there in the summer, and then it just came to a standstill.
So I read an update, and Amy, we may have a little more information. So the project should be complete by the spring. Most of it will be complete by the end of the, I think by the end of this year. There was a lot of work that had to be done under the surface for electrical and plumbing. And then to erect some of the foundational elements, the supports and so on, those items of material had been subject to supply chain problems, which are ongoing for some of these highly specialized pieces of equipment that are necessary. So, but that material should become available soon, and that'll allow them to do probably 60 or 70% of the work, and then they would finish it up after the new year, and then do a dedication in the spring. That's the plan.
That's accurate. And I also want to just mention, if you are all not signed up for the town's newsletter that comes out every Thursday, in fact, should be going out shortly. There's going to be a whole area updating the situation with the town common project. So I can email out to you all a link where you could just sign up. We don't sell your email to anybody. It's once a week you'll get in your inbox updates from what's going on with the town. And seeing as how we lost one of our local papers, I think this is filling a void for folks to find out what's going on. So I'll send that out right after we wrap up.
Great. Jeremy, your hand is up.
I've got to run away. But the other thing was, could you circulate something that's graphical about where you're thinking about the changes in the microbrew and brew pub situation? Because you said it all, but my brain doesn't work that way. I need to see a pretty picture. So if you could circulate that, it would be great.
We're working on I'm working with the planning department to prepare a map.
Okay.
That would show where those uses would be allowed. So we'll
Okay.
have that probably in a couple of weeks.
Okay, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And to that point, that's the kind of thing where I know that as a community, we have a YouTube channel and there, the minutes of meetings are posted, but there is, I just hear anecdotally people occasionally gnashing their teeth about a lack of information in various places. So there are some critical projects, including Town Green and the liquor and Muzi, that I feel like if we should take extra efforts to make sure we're communicating what is true and what is not true. Because I hear a lot of not true out, as a dad on the sideline of a soccer field. And so
Yeah,
anyway, just my 2 cents.
that's a good note on communication. Thank you very much.
Okay, I gotta run. I'm sorry, guys. It's
Oh,
been nice to
very
see
good.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay,
Does
bye.
someone want to make a motion to adjourn? Oh, Mike, yes, go ahead.
Just a quick question that maybe Amy can answer. In the park, nothing is going on with the Boston Children's site on First Ave. And I don't know if you have any insights, Amy, as to what is delaying that project since it was approved last year, at least by the town.
Yeah, as I understand it, they are still awaiting final approval from the state. So anytime a hospital is looking to build a new facility and have additional beds or services, it needs to go through the Department of Health to get approval for that. I will check on the status and get back to you to let you know where that stands. But unfortunately, I think that's taking longer than anybody anticipated.
Thank you.
And Amy will be in touch with members of this subcommittee about next steps and when we'll reconvene and get the whole band back together for the CEA. In the meantime, does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion by Rick to adjourn, a second. Second by
Second.
Bob Henschel. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Rick Putprush,
What do you want me? Yes,
Aye,
yes.
Aye, or
Aye,
yes? Very good.
yes.
Mike Wilcox,
Aye.
and Bob Henschel.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Good to
Thank
see
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.